All right. Welcome, everyone, to the October 2023 5 Miles from Anywhere meeting. We're going to start with some announcements, and I'll give my talk. Then we'll have some time for some questions and answers. And that's pretty much how it's going to go today. I'll do a little bit of reading as well from some of my work, okay? So let me share my screen here. Right, there we go. Coming at the end there. Oh, we get a little preview for what's coming at the end. All right, so this is gonna be odd for me because I'm gonna be talking like the whole time. So, all right, so for today, so I'll start with some announcements. Then we will go to my talk, which is a tale of two stories. And then we'll get to the discussion, okay? So first, a couple of announcements. I am excited to announce that the Broad Street Irregulars is going to have a meeting on October 21st from 2:30 to 4 Eastern time. Hold on one sec, I got a couple people in the waiting room. All right, there we go. So if you are interested in coming to the Broad Street Regulars meeting, I'm going to send out a link to our site, and everybody here would be invited to join us. David Markham, who's on this call, is going to give a talk on some of the chronology of solar ponds. Chris Chan is going to give a talk on Judge Peck, who was another detective that August Derleth wrote about. And Frank Schuldiner is going to write a little about just where solar ponds fits in pulp fiction. So it's going to be a really cool meeting, and I really hope everybody here, if you have a chance, can join us. Then I also want to announce that the Beacon Society has a new creative writing contest. It is called the Nancy Springer Creative Writing Contest, and Nancy Springer gave us our blessing to use her name. And it's for our students to create their own Sherlock Holmes story. There's two different age groups. I believe it's grades 7 through 9 and 10 through 12. And they can win like nice cash prizes. Things like you can get like $300 in a trophy. So if you know any students or anybody in that age category, please encourage them to submit. And that would be great. All right, any additional, I always pause now for any additional announcements. If you have any, you can just unmute and let us know. Wow, we're quiet today. usually this time of year, there's lots of announcements. Okay. So, all right, I guess we'll move on. All right, so, all right, and so I'll get to my talk then. And this is really odd because I have to introduce myself, but here we go. So, Derek Belanger, that's me, okay, is an award-winning author, publisher, and educator, most noted for my books and lectures on Sherlock Holmes and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I've had a number of books #1 in their category on Amazon. I'm co-owner of Belanger Books, which published the first ebook editions of the original Solar Ponds books by August Derleth. I'm a board member of Dr. Watson's Neglected Patients, the Denver-based Science Society. In fact, I'm now the secretary. And in 2019, I was inducted into the Broad Street Irregulars. In January 2020, I was awarded the Susan Z. Diamond Award in recognition of outstanding efforts to introduce young people to Sherlock Holmes. And as you know, my story, The Adventure of the Misquoted Macbeth, was selected for inclusion in the best mystery stories of the year. And so that's what we'll be talking about today. All right. So here we go. So I'm actually going to start with a quote from the book, The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. Now, this is a book. If any of you have read it, it's amazing. It is about the Vietnam War. So this has nothing to do with Sherlock Holmes. However, throughout the book, the author keeps explaining to the reader why he writes war stories. And one of the big themes of the book is how do you tell a true story, or in his case, a true war story. And so I just want to read the quote. And he says in this one little excerpt, so his daughter asked him, why do you keep writing? And, he says, it's a good question. But he says, the thing is, you take your material where you find it, which is in your life at the intersection of past and present. The memory traffic feeds into a rotary up on your head, where it goes in circles for a while. Then pretty soon imagination flows in and the traffic merges and shoots off down 1,000 different streets. As a writer, all you can do is pick a street and go for that ride, putting things down as they come to you. That's the real obsession, all those stories. And that's kind of where I'm going to go, because in many ways, that's how I write. My brain kind of grabs things and takes me to certain places and finds ways to mash them together. And so he said you do this for lots of stories. We're just going to hear about 2 of them today from me, okay? All right, so got to start back in 2020 as I go here. So this is Martin Rosenstock. He's my editor when I write for Titan Books. And in October of 2020, he reached out to me with an invitation to contribute to a new Sherlock Holmes anthology he was assembling titled Sherlock Holmes, A Detective's Life. The premise of the anthology was to have a dozen stories spanning Holmes's entire career. So I was pretty excited about that. I accepted the offer and waited. And he said, hey, here's the time frame I'd like you to do. I'd like you to write a story that fits in between 1882 and 1886. So, really so I was like, okay, I got to do a little research then, because this is a specific time period. And so before I start writing a Holmes pastiche, which I have to fit into a certain time frame, I always consult 2 sources, as I'm sure many of the authors on here do as well. First, I go to the timeline established by William S. Baring Gould in Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street, one of my favorite books of all time. And then I check it against the updated timeline by Leslie Klinger in the new annotated Sherlock Holmes series, which again, one of the best things ever. So these are 2 of the heavyweights. So for those of you who are into Holmes chronology, which I know a lot of you are, and I know that at least a few of you are, this is quite fertile ground for writing a Holmes adventure. Per these sources, okay, there are no canonical stories which take place in 1882, and only one, The Speckled Band, which takes place in 1883, none in 1884 and 1885. So plenty of space here. And depending on which one of these 2 gentlemen you're reading, either one story in 1886, which is per Klinger, or 3 late in 1886 per Baring Gould. And we won't get into a big chronology fight here, which one's accurate. It's okay, because the nice thing is what I really, really needed was to have space in this year right here, 1884. And this was the one I wanted. So why 1884? Well, as many of you Sherlockian know, and I'm going to quote Baring Gould here, So this is his quote, between the April of 1883 and the October of 1886, Baron Gould goes on to explain, Watson left us no record of the adventures of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. There is good reason why. For most of this entire period, Dr. Watson was in the United States of America. Perfect. Okay, I got space. And according to Baron Gould, and later accepted by many Sherlockians, Watson went to San Francisco at this time to tend to his ailing brother. And it's there where he meets his first wife, either Constance Adams per Baron Gould or Louise Hawkins per Klinger. Okay, and there is, of course, some debate about that. Now, I know like 1884 is later than 1883, but I thought, I could play around with that a little bit and just say, okay, Watson was still in England until 1884 before he went to America. I thought I could play around with that and still fit pretty much, relatively speaking, within the Baron Gould timeline. So I wrote to Martin, my editor, and I asked, hey, would it be cool if I incorporated Watson's first wife and his brother into my story? I got a soft yes. The reason was, he's like, okay, you can incorporate Watson's brother into the story, but Watson's wife is not. No wife before Mary or after Mary is in the canon, so you can't include her, which I thought was fine. I said, can I hint at her? And he said, yes. So that's okay with me. So with his consent, I now had the frame of my story. And I wanted the pastiche to show Watson having this internal struggle as the frame for the true mystery of it, with him dealing with his alcoholic brother who was on his deathbed, and just having Watson kind of debating, should he go to San Francisco to help him? He's very resentful of his brother for wasting his life. And so that was a big part of like, okay, I really like that. So I had this framework, but I still wasn't really sure about the mystery. And that's when it comes to Shakespeare. Okay. So, here's where I take a page from Tim O'Brien and just say that my life gets incorporated into my work. And I'm going to talk more about that as I keep going today. So this is where our good friend, Mr. William Shakespeare, enters the picture. So at the time, I was starting to develop my pastiche and kind of just playing around with ideas, going down some of those streets and just thinking things through. I was teaching a unit on Othello in a combined English history high school class. So I was the third teacher in there. The other two were Steve Lash and Jim Mandole. They taught English and history. And at that time in my school, we had a combined unit, and I was the special education teacher in there. So at the beginning of the unit, we kind of each take one of the witches, and to get the kids used to the language of Shakespeare, we all read the opening of Macbeth. And so while reciting, double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble, was one of the witches, for some reason my mind thought, because I love Macbeth, is like my favorite play of all time. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if for some reason these lines were a little different, and how that could end up being part of a mystery. And so that's where I kind of got to like, what if some of this was incorrect? Why would it be? And that's when I found the street to go down for my story. And of course, to tie Shakespeare, and I do this with several of my stories. I love Shakespeare. He's one of my favorites, just as, of course, Doyle is. And the nice thing is there's an extremely rich connection, as you know, between Shakespeare and Sherlock Holmes. So here's a couple of things just as FYIs. Okay, first of all, Doyle himself was this huge Shakespeare fan. Okay, he loved Shakespeare. On January 18th, 1887, Doyle spoke at the stage of Shakespeare Festival in Portsmouth. Doyle argued that Shakespeare was a dramatist. I think this is a really cool argument, simply because it was the only literary outlet available to young authors in the Elizabethan time period. So like it was the only way you could really do like fiction. Had Shakespeare, Doyle argued, lived in the Victorian era, he probably would not have been a playwright. He would have also been a novelist. I would love to get a copy of that talk, and I could not find it. I've looked everywhere. So if anyone can help me, if anyone knows if it's been recorded, please let me know. In 1888, Doyle wrote a letter to Charlotte Drummond in which he said, and this is a quote, "Poor old Shakespeare, I fear it is all up with him, alas." He was referring at that time to the great cryptogram by Ignatius Donnelly, which claimed that Francis Bacon was the true author of Shakespeare's work. And there have been a couple of other quote unquote Shakespeare conspiracies over the time. Fortunately for Doyle and for Shakespeare, as we know, this theory was proved false. And honestly, almost all of these theories that pop up every now and then, it's very classist. You know, people can't believe that there could have had, an average person could have been as great as Shakespeare. So we won't worry about that. All right, so with Doyle's love of the bard, it is no surprise that Shakespeare quotes are sprinkled throughout the canon. Most famously, as we know, Holmes quotes from Henry V of the Abbey Grange when he tells Watson, "Come, Watson, come. The game is afoot." Oh, what a great line, great play right there too, Henry V. In the story, The Three Students, this is kind of a fun one, Holmes chastises Watson. "By Jove, my dear fellow, it is nearly 9, and the landlady babbled of green peas at 7:30. So, which is kind of a weird thing to say. This actually is an allusion to another quote from, again, Henry V. This time, it's about Falstaff's death. It is said as he died, he, quote, babbled of green fields. So instead of babbling of green fields, Holmes has this connection with babbling of green peas. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly for us, in both The Empty House and The Red Circle, Holmes quotes from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night when he says, "Journeys end with lovers meeting." The fact that Shakespeare said that quote twice in the canon, as a lot of you guys probably know, led Christopher Morley to reason that Holmes was so fond of the play because his birthday was January 6th, the 12th night. Whether or not this reasoning is logical, I'll leave you to decide. However, that's why we all gather so early in the dark and cold of winter for BSI weekend in New York, because that's around the time of Sherlock Holmes's birthday, according to Mr. Morley. All right, so I wanted to continue with that rich tradition of linking Holmes and Shakespeare, and so I did it in my story with these three ladies here, the witches in Macbeth. And for that opening, since the witches are asking each other where to meet again, I thought that would be a cool puzzle for Sherlock Holmes to solve if someone took the witches' lines, changed them slightly, and made it so that they would be alluding to the location of a theft. So I'm going to pause and read a brief section of my story here. At this point, the client, Mr. Armstrong, has brought the case to Holmes. He's a debt collector who was mistakenly given an envelope which he thought contained the mortgage payment of a man named Mr. Snerdley. When he got home, he found it contained no money, but just a slip of paper. And in that paper was the opening of the Three Witches from Macbeth. So he couldn't figure out why that was there. And so at this point, Holmes and Watson are back in Baker Street, and Watson saying like this, what's up with this? It's just a slip of paper that has the Three Witches quote on it. And this is where Holmes is going to correct Watson. No surprise there. Okay. So Holmes says, that is where you are mistaken, my dear Watson. While the words are taken in part from Macbeth, they are misquoted. The original quotation reads that the first witch, when shall we three meet again, in thunder, lightning, or in rain? Second witch, when the hurly's burly's done, when the battle's lost and won, that will be ere the set of sun. Third witch, where's the place? Second witch, upon the heath. Third witch, there we go to meet Macbeth. If you recall, Watson, the note Armstrong received quoted several of those lines incorrectly. The first witch said that the three witches would meet again when the moon neither waxes nor wanes, not in thunder, lightning, or in rain. I do seem to remember that, Holmes, but I'll have to take your word for it. My friend nodded. He knew that I lacked the faculty of etching something into my mind by mere way of a glance. The note also said that the time they will meet is on the arrival of the sun instead of at the setting of the sun, Holmes explained. And the last change was that they would meet Macbeth not upon the heath, but upon the saint. Most interesting, Holmes, but what does it all mean? It means, my friend, that our three ne'er-do-wells are planning to meet at St. Catherine's Docks at dawn on Thursday. Thursday in 2 days? But, I blubbered, how could you read all that from the note? Holmes fixed me with a steely-eyed gaze. The pieces are all there, my friend. I simply had to look for what had been altered from the original. First, the time of the meeting when the moon neither waxes nor wanes. That would mean a new or full moon. There is a full moon tomorrow evening. This is followed by the line that the time is at the arrival of the sun. So that would mean dawn, the dawn after the full moon. There you go, Thursday morning. The quote concludes by saying the three will meet upon the saint to find Macbeth. Well, there are many churches and cathedrals in London named after saints. The wording that they shall meet on the saint would indicate a location such as a field or a dock. The most likely answer then is that the three men will meet at St. Catherine Docks. And so that then leads into the mystery itself and the story, which I'm not going to spoil. So if you haven't read it yet, definitely either read it in the first book that it was published in, A Life of Mystery, or in the Best Mysteries of the Year. All right, so let's get back to the talk, okay? So I wrote the story, as you know, and went back and forth, my editor and some readers, and then in September 2022, the book, Sherlock Holmes, A Detective's Life, is released. It does well from what I've told, and then, it got some positive reviews, and I just moved on to my next project. I didn't really think anything of this one. Most reviews that were positive did not mention my story, and not to say that they didn't like it. It just wasn't like one that was like highlighted. And so I just thought, okay, which is fine. So then I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to this year, January 2023. So it's January. And I just landed in Denver. I was actually sitting in the airplane on the tarmac at the Denver airport, coming back from a very jubilant BSI weekend. And so, they announced, okay, you can turn your phones back on. So I turn my phone on, and immediately I get a bing on the phone. And it's an email from this gentleman you see in front of you, Mr. Otto Penzler. And the email is titled, Today's Good News. So I think, okay, cool. There's probably going to be some like new book that's out, or Otto's always got amazing projects going on. So I was pretty excited. But then I open it up, and here's the email I received, which kind of floored me because it says that Otto Penzler and Amor Towles, who, if you've ever read his like Gentleman in Moscow or any of his books, are amazing, New York Times best-selling author, that they had picked my story as one of the most outstanding published in the 2022 calendar year for inclusion in the Mysterious Bookshop presents the best mystery stories of the year. So I get this, and I'm in the plane, and I can't scream because I was like, oh my God, there's like, I'm trapped here. And then at the bottom, it says, congratulations, but don't announce this yet. So I couldn't even tell anybody about this like incredible news, which was kind of like, whoa, wow. So, I just didn't even know what to say. And then, I got the contract, everything signed, and the book came out a couple of weeks ago. So I do want to pause for a second and just say that I don't know any details beyond this email as to why Amor or Otto picked my story. They chose it out of 3,000 mysteries published in 2022. Thought out of those 3,000 or so that I was in the top 20 with this one, which is, I don't even know what to say about that. So if I was to hasten a guess as to why this one was chosen, I really think it's probably about that internal conflict of Watson dealing with the brother. I don't know that for certain, but I think that probably is what they probably thought elevated this mystery maybe above some others. But again, I can't say that for certain. I'm just guessing on that. All right. So now we're going to come to February, just the next month. So, sorry, I actually skipped the slide. So that was what I meant to say for the last one. So why this story? There's Mr. Amor Towles. And if you haven't read any of his work, definitely go ahead and do so. So then we come to February. Right after I get this announcement, I get an email from Andrew Gooley, the editor of The Strand, which was out of the blue. And he asked me if I would contribute a story to the Strand magazine, which I was kind of surprised because I didn't know that they would ask authors to contribute. I thought you submit. So I was pretty excited about that. He asked if I had a pre-publication story ready to submit. And I said I didn't quite, but there was one that I was working on. I could finish up and get it to him fairly quickly. And he was very happy about that. And that's how my story, Dr. Watson Takes the Case, ends up in the Strand. So next up. So one of the things I realized as I was going over my stories and getting ready for today was just how much I love Dr. Watson. When I first started writing pastiches, I was drawn to Holmes, but over the years, I've become more enamored with the good doctor. I think it's because I write through his eyes, and therefore, I have to see the world the way he does. That also means the reverse is true, and Watson, in my writing, very much sees the world through my eyes. The issues that he deals with are issues which I deal with myself. So for this story, I started with having the idea of Watson taking the lead. Then my question for this one was, what if a client came who wanted to see Watson? So that's kind of where I got with the Strand story. And I'll read you a little bit of this one as well. So this is from Dr. Watson Takes the Case. It says, it was a pleasant winter day when I was first introduced to Alistair Banner and heard his surprising request to have his workplace investigated. Holmes at that time was assisting in the search for the missing Fielder twins, a case that had stumped the yard and captured the attention of all of London. Even if my friend hadn't been preoccupied, the Banner case was not the type to draw his attention. Little did I know it would soon draw mine. And so this character, Alistair Banner, shows up at 221B Baker Street. And this is kind of the start to the story. So it wasn't until after the sun had set and only twilight was left in the sky that Alistair Bannister finally made his way to our lodgings. He vigorously shook our hands when Holmes and I greeted him at the door. His full lips spoke with a tremor of anguish as he introduced himself. Dark, curly mutton chops framed his round, nervous face. "Thank you for seeing me, sirs," said he. "I'm at my wit's end. All the alienists I've seen have turned me down. You were a desperate measure." "Alienists?" Holmes asked, disappointment clear in his tone. "I'm not sure you need my services." Banner rebounded sharply. "Begging your pardon, sir, I don't." Holmes uncharacteristically looked perplexed. "Then why, pray tell, are you here?" "I don't need your services, Mr. Holmes. I need his." He pointed his stubby finger directly at me. "Me?" I stumbled. Now it was my turn to be surprised. "Of course, doctor. This is a medical issue that needs puzzling out." I was baffled and found myself tongue-tied. Holmes spoke for me. "You have our attention, sir. Let us sit, and you can tell us all about it." Again, I won't read any more because I don't want to spoil the story. But and a couple of people had emailed me asking, like, "Oh, where can we get that copy of the Strand?" And there's two ways you can subscribe to the Strand. And a lot of larger bookstores carry the Strand. So if you have a Barnes and Noble or a local bookstore near you, check with them because you could probably get a copy of it just on the newsstand. Okay, so let's get back to wrapping this up. So in going back and rereading both of the pieces for my talk, I realized just how much my life is reflected in my writing. These stories were my way of connecting to positive and negative aspects of my day job, okay? So Misquoted Macbeth reflected the joy I feel in teaching my students to appreciate Shakespeare, but also just to appreciate great literature. And I think that that love comes across in the Misquoted Macbeth story. On the other hand, sometimes the darkness that happens in the world ends up in my stories. And when I went back and reread Dr. Watson Takes the Case, in a sense, I kind of got depressed because it was really about an issue of teachers being mistreated. And you'd have to read the story to get to see probably to understand what I'm alluding to. But if you read the stories, you're not going to know that they're connected to my life. But it kind of shook me a little bit when I went back and reread it for this talk and saw those connections. And this also goes back to that quote from The Things They Carried I started this talk with, that, you know, I have to write. And when I write, I'm trying to reach some objective truth in my writing, even if it's through fiction. And I thought these other two quotes I really liked. Neil Gaiman said one of the central tools of literature is using the lie of a made-up story to tell the human truth. And then Albert Camus, fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth. And I think in many ways, those quotes really capture what I've realized with my writing. So wrapping up, both of these publications, this is really interesting, came out within a week of each other. So it's like, whoa, it was a really busy September last month. So honestly, I just have to say, it caps off one hell of a year, great year of writing. Beyond these two stories, I've had a number of excellent stories in Blender Books anthologies. We've had some wonderful publications this year, including the Consultations of Sherlock Holmes, which was edited by Ray Wraithmeyer, and The Detective and the Clergyman, which is the adventures of Sherlock Holmes and Father Brown, which was edited by David Markham. I've also had essays appear in the Baker Street Journal and the Sherlock Holmes Journal from the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. And I look forward to seeing what the rest of this year and 2024 brings as well. I already know that I have a story. I've heard from Carla Koop that I have a story coming up in Sherlock Holmes Mystery Magazine, either the spring or summer edition. And Belanger Books, we have some pretty exciting publications coming out the rest of this year and into next year, which, you'll see more about probably just through Facebook posts and things like that and Kickstarter campaigns. So that wraps up my talk. And I just want to pause here for a little bit and just take some questions to see what people have to say. So let me just stop the share and we'll come back to this in a little bit. So again, if you have a question or comment, you can either use the hand raising feature or just unmute and ask me, and I'd be happy to chat with you.
I have a question there.
Hi, Anna.
Oh, how do I show this? Yeah, turn your volume down. Sorry, we've got two computers going on the same room. Apologies. So first of all, congratulations. That's great. So as an educator myself, I just marvel at you. I just wonder, do you ever sleep, or do you just finding time to write and do all the other things you do and teach? I mean, it's really amazing. I do not have that energy. I have to write in the summer. This year you must really have a very regimented schedule where you can fit in everything.
I do, and I actually do get a good night's sleep. It's interesting because like this year in particular, just my family life's quite busy. Just my kids are involved in lots of things this year, and then I've taken on an extra role teaching. I'm also an instructional leader at my school, and then I'm also doing the writing and the publishing. So I've learned, to what would I say, balance and juggle things and kind of learn what you have to let go. So sometimes I just have to slow down a little bit as well. But it's a good question. And it looks like we have a question coming up in the chat. Oliver, did you post your question, Oliver? Let me see. Said yes. Yes, you're welcome to post a question in the chat as well. All right, so I've got two questions in the chat. One is from Margie. She writes, she asks if I'm a pantser or a plotter. Do I have an outline and stick to the plan, or do I have an idea and just kind of see what happens? It's a kind of a little of both. I usually like to start with the ending and work my way towards it. But as I think Stephen King once said, that writing isn't connect the dots, and so you can't do that. It doesn't always work that way, and I would agree with that. So sometimes, I go down that analogy of those roads, and I kind of find different paths, and so the story's never exactly what I expect for the ending to be. So with, for example, that Dr. Watson takes the case, I had an idea for that, about a month before I started, maybe even 2 months before I started writing the story. I liked that idea. I remember talking with David Markham a little bit about it at BSI weekend. And then suddenly it just got the idea and I wrote it. And then I realized now, like, oh, now I know where that idea came from. Because it was like, it came from something from work. So All right. But that's kind of my answer. I hope that's yeah, Margie said, okay. Yeah. Oliver asked, do I keep count of my home stories? And if so, where am I? Um, I don't. I actually don't. I did do kind of a rough count, and I'm about 60 where Doyle was last I checked. So I am going to go back and count it. It's just a matter of time. And so, because it does take a while to go through everything and check and figure it all out and determining what counts as a home story too. Because sometimes I had homes doing stuff, but it may have been like a little wacky thing, and I wouldn't necessarily count it. Um, so, but yeah, I've written a lot in the last decade. That's for sure. All right, other questions? Feel free to either do the hand raise or unmute to jump in because we still have a few minutes left. Walter?
I'd like to ask, although I'll tell you what, the Misquoted Scottish play was fabulous. Just a really fun read. Let me ask you, since I'm from Denver, can you tell me where you teach, what schools you teach at?
Oh, okay. You're in Denver. Are you in Denver now?
No, I'm
okay.
in Virginia Beach, but I came out here into the East in 60s, but I was raised in Denver.
All right. I'm in the, so if you came out before the 80s, that's when my school was built. So you might not know, but I'm in the Adams 12 school district. I'm in Thornton.
In Thornton.
So I teach at Horizon High School in Thornton, Colorado. So that's the district I'm in.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. If you ever come back to visit, Walter, let us know because you can join one of our Dr. Watson's meetings. That'd be awesome. Okay, we get together at Pines Pub on 13th Street in Denver once a month, and it's a blast.
I think that was built after I left too.
It may have been. It may have been. All right, cool. Somebody else. Oh, Larry. Speaking of Denver. You're muted, my friend.
I know. Took me a second. I think that I commented to you that I think one of the things about that story that maybe would have been special is not just the link to his brother, which seemed to me, by the way, is a lot more than a hint. But okay, I'm glad you got it in.
Yeah.
But the fact that it was actually something that changed Watson. Because one thing about Sherlock Holmes stories is that their characters, Holmes and Watson, don't change much in the course of a single story. They changed a lot over the years as the writing changed and as everybody aged, I guess. But in a single story, there's never something that alters their life of them. And Watson really learned something. He changed. He became a different kind of a person. It moved him. And I just thought that was like one of the better things about that story. And I think that's why it probably made the impression it did.
No, yeah. And the hint wasn't about the brother. The hint was about the wife. So
the wife.
I hint at the end that he meets the first love of his life. And that's as far as I was allowed to go. So that was the hint.
Right.
No, that's a good point. And I try to do that. I think in a lot of my stories, show some character growth, whether it's with Holmes, Watson, or a client. Because I think the Strand story as well, with Watson taking the case, that's him kind of taking a different role and thinking it through and kind of thinking, okay, what is it like to think like Sherlock Holmes? And so to me, I think that's another place where he grew. And interestingly, just as we're talking here, what popped in my head too is both stories have frames. The first story, as I said, is framed around Watson and dealing with his brother. But the second story, the Dr. Watson takes the case, is framed around Holmes has a different case he's trying to solve. He's preoccupied with finding these missing twins. And so that's one of the things. He's like, I've got this other case I've got to deal with. Watson, you definitely should take on, this case. And so, both those stories do get resolved in my short story there.
Sounds like the Lindbergh baby.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I mean, I think, I didn't really think of that, but that does make sense, right? It would, sure.
All right. Well, great.
Thank you.
Keep writing, Derek.
Oh, that's not going to stop. So, as long as I get something to say, I'll put it down, even if you guys don't want to hear it.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Still got a few minutes left. Oh, Brian?
Yeah. When you use the Baring Gould and the Klinger books, to confirm timelines and so forth, are there ever times when you say to yourself, I think they're both wrong? I think that it's actually the Wisteria Lodge setting in 1892 makes perfect sense.
When you're in the hiatus.
Right, exactly. But no, seriously, do you ever review them both and say, you've got valid points, guys, but I think such and such would have happened on this date?
It's let me think. I don't know. Because sometimes I do look at other sources as well, of other chronologies. I don't, Redheaded League's probably the one where it's like, there's so many weird things with the dates of that story that, I think it's hard to say, when it takes place and all of that. And so, I think we also have to step back and say, we're fighting over these stories, which I'm going to step away from playing the game for a minute and say, we are fighting over fiction. And so it's difficult because of that, to go super far in it. But, I know some of you are diehard chronologists, and it is important, and it's fun. And it's cool that I would say, because we care so much about the Sherlock Holmes chronology, it's now spread into other characters and other pieces of literature. And anything from Harry Potter to Breaking Bad, if you go online, there are huge timeline issues and huge timeline battles with chronology. And so I think, again, it stems from Holmes, though. I don't think that really happened before Sherlockians did that. And so I think it's cool that we have these battles. I usually with those two gentlemen, though, Klinger and Baring Gould, I feel like they're just like the pinnacle of authority. And so I usually kind of just go with them. I'm not sure if I could ever think of a time I really disagreed with them. So.
Okay.
All right. Oliver asks a follow-up question. Since I've written so many stories, am I going to be like Mr. Markham here and collect them? And I don't know. It's a good question. So what I'm working on, I'm going to finally write a novel I've been planning out. And part of that novel is going to incorporate some of the stories that I've read. And it's going to have these two particular stories are actually going to be in the book. Because I kind of want to do a story collection that's almost like more like a novel. Because when I was growing up, those are some of my favorite books, particularly Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles, where it's a short story collection, but it's really almost like a novel because he frames it, and the way he organizes it, it tells a cohesive narrative, which is, to me, fascinating. And so I kind of want to play around with that to start with. And then I'll see how many stories I use in that. because I'm going to actually, it'll be mostly new material, but I am going to incorporate at least these two, possibly the other book I wrote, a story I wrote for Titan in the, what was the book? I guess it was The Sign of Seven, was a novella in there too. So my plan is to at least do those. I've been in a couple other stories that'll intertwine into the plot that I'm considering. Very similar to if you read Bonnie McBird's Sherlock Holmes books, she does that. She has three, like Holmes and Watson are dealing with usually three cases at once, and she intertwines them as they're solving them. And she was, some of you were there, I think it was last December, she was our speaker, and you should go back and watch it. It was a really great interview. All right, I have time for maybe one more question before we wrap up. Any last one? Brian again? Did you have your hand up? Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just like.
Okay.
But
you'll probably heard
okay,
enough.
well, you know what? How about this? Well then, since you are planning to sort of intertwine different stories and so forth, what about using public domain characters and stories and intertwine those into your the world that you're building here?
So you're saying take other characters and build them in?
Yeah, I'm saying, would that interest you, or have you ever been tempted to name drop characters from other stories or something, or to allude to them simply because you know they're available and it would be fun?
Well, I mean, I've done that in the past. I've done two stories with Holmes and Father Brown, for example. I had a Carnegie story where he consults Holmes. So I have done that in the past and expanded to contemporaries. Some say the rivals of Sherlock Holmes. But I don't plan on it for the book I'm considering writing. I don't want to say too much yet about it. But that one would be one. Going back to Margie's question, where I have kind of plotted that one out, and I'll just see where the road takes me when I write it. And my thought right now is it'd be a part of a trilogy. But again, I keep thinking I'm saying too much here, and I don't want to say much more than that. Before I wrap, since David is here, I do want to ask you a question. So David's the only other Sherlock Holmes story that's appeared in a Best Mystery of the Year. He was in the 2021 anthology. And I was just wondering, David, did you ever get more than just that email from Otto as to why your story was included?
No, I did not. He actually put a message on Facebook one day, like saying, contact me urgently because time is about up. He had been trying to send me a message to the wrong email address to tell me that I was included. And so I called him back at the store and asked him, and I was really surprised. It was actually a story that I had in the Strand magazine. And I told him, I didn't even think it was one of the better ones I'd written had he not seen this one or that one. And he didn't even know about those, but I was glad that he picked the one that he did. And then, like you said, that year, the editor was Lee Child, who has actually contributed a forward to the MX anthologies. And I've emailed with him a little bit, but I wrote him and thanked him and kind of hinted to ask why he picked it. And he didn't answer the question. So it's just as much a mystery for the 2021 book that I was in as it is for you in the 2023 book.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. All right. Oliver put a question in, and it's Bonnie McBird is the woman, and you could look her books up. They're very easy to come by. All right, so I just want to share my screen one more time to talk about next week's meeting. And
next week?
I'm sorry, next month. Thank you. You can tell, but by running the Zoom and giving the main talk, it's been, and looking at the comments as I'm listening to everybody, it's been interesting. All right, but I do want to give a shout out because our next month's speaker is on here, and November's talk is Craig Copeland, who has written a short novel as a tribute to all 60 stories in the canon. So he's got 60 of them. The result has been over 3 million words typed and over 250,000 books sold. And I'm really looking forward to this one. Craig, would you like to say anything about next month's meeting?
Sure. I have nowhere near the encyclopedic knowledge of Sherlock Holmes and Doyle that some of the people that I have been looking at for the last hour do. What I've worked on is writing mystery stories and trying to write a better and better story. So I'll be happy to share what I've learned about that and trying to sell it into the modern mystery thriller suspense marketplace.
All right. And definitely I can vouch that Mr. Copeland here is a fine author, very, very good. And, you know, definitely worthy of selling all those books. And really looking forward to your talk next month, because I think it's going to be fantastic. All right. Well, everyone, it's about 11, so we did it. We got everything in. I want to thank you all for coming. As I said, November, Craig Copeland. And December, I have kind of a special announcement for that one, but I'm going to hold off till November. I hope all of you can make it to the Prod Street Regulars meeting in a few weeks. And again, I'll send an invite and a link for that as well. Other than that, have a happy Halloween and have a wonderful start to autumn. Enjoy your foliage, and I will see you next month. Take care, all.
See you. Bye.
Bye.